All right, so thank you for checking in. And today we're going to be talking about the book To Have a Center by Fridtjof Schuon. And I really hope I'm saying that correctly. But this was another perennialist philosopher, friends with Rene Guénon. I'm not sure what his relationship with Evola was. But yeah, he's part of that same school. And upon first reading, my initial thoughts are I think there's some very interesting stuff here, but as far as it goes, very, very esoteric at points. I'd say this is much more difficult to read than either Guénon or Evola. It's probably the most difficult perennialist book we've read here. And I don't think that detracts from it. I think there's still a lot of good stuff here, but there is a lot of stuff that, I'll be honest, I don't know how well I could comment on. So I hope that someone like Satanta can chime in every so often with some views, because I know he's very much into the Schuon and his philosophy. So starting, if we just look at the first essay, it's, I don't want to say series of essays. The first chapter is titled "To Have a Center," and there was a whole foreword about how that was how he chose the name of the book itself. And this was probably the most interesting chapter of all of them, just this very first one. And essentially, what he talks about this caste system that is very perennialist in its themes, which you kind of see this in Evola, you see this in Guénon. It's you have the philosopher aristocracy kind of class. You have this warrior noble class. Then you have the merchant class, and then finally a slave class, right? And he says that no matter what mode of society you're in, this is going to be inescapable. And Evola's talked about different things about when a different class comes to dominate the society. Schuon isn't so much concerned with society as a whole, but rather the person. And what it means to have a center means to be at one with this mindset of your class, right? And to fully embody what your role is. And a lot of the book discusses this concept of genius and what it means to be a genius. And Schuon's actually writing pretty recently. I think this is written in the 80s, which was pretty surprising to me because, it's obviously very traditionalist in nature. But he talks about this modern rise of the genius, right? And you have, a very intelligent person that is sort of looked up to, if not worshipped by society. And what exactly is wrong with the modern day genius? Well, he says that they don't have a center. And what exactly does that mean? Well, we'll get into that. But he talks about people like Nietzsche not having a center. Or who else? Well, I would say this is sort of what I talked about. I made a video earlier this week on Bill Gates and Elon Musk and what exactly is wrong with them. Well, actually, after reading this book, I would say they don't have a center. They're not centered in their intellect, right? Because they're very intelligent people, of course. But like Schuon says, that you need to have your intellect pointed towards some type of center, and that is how you're going to properly utilize that intellect and be a true genius, and not sort of this corrupted modern genius, right? And what does it mean to be like the ideal member of these various castes? So your philosopher aristocrat, obviously you're going to be wise, you're going to be intelligent, you're going to be producing great works of philosophy and such. Then your warrior noble, right? You're going to practice, chivalry. You're going to be a defender of truth and honor. But then he says this merchant class, you're just going to be like a good person, right? An average person who is looked upon as honorable and respectful and does their job, right? And then the final one is the corruption, right? The slave class. There really is no redeeming factor for the slave. They just need to quell their appetites, right? So the slave is going to be tending towards hedonism, right? They're going to want to do drugs and not work and succumb to these various external factors. So the only way that the slave can reach some sort of actualization is by just denying this tendency towards hedonism, right? So he says that sometimes that's why it makes them a slave, is they need to be controlled. They need to have something moving them away from this tendency towards self-destruction. All right, so that's what it means essentially to have a center for each of these classes, right? But then he says if you are going to be a genius, right, in a very high intellect, somebody of this, philosopher, aristocrat caste, and you are not going to have that intellect pointed towards some type of spiritual center, then you end up having a mixture of the classes, right? So he talks about how, and this was true in Indian society, the mixing of the classes made you, it was literally where the word pariah comes from, I believe. You were a pariah, you were basically an outcast of society, well, literally an outcast, right? You were not part of any caste because you mixed castes. So it was sort of on par with like a miscegenation or something like that, where you would have no identity, you would have no role, and therefore would have no place in that society, right? And he says that this is now happening sort of at an individual mental level. So you have the philosopher intellect, but they're going to have the drives and passions of a slave, right? And once again, I know I'm always tearing apart Nietzsche, but I think that is a kind of a good characterization. He's obviously very, very intelligent, but once again, if you look at his personal life and some of the certain things that he says, he does seem to be pointed not exactly towards a spiritual truth. He seems to be more pointed towards a material, possibly even hedonistic truth, which is going to corrupt his intellect to a very high degree, right? And then you look at plenty of modern day examples, right? I said the Bill Gates, the Elon Musk, have a very, very high intellect, but it's not pointed towards the spiritual center, so you're going to result in this enslaving type mindset where you're just going to give people what they need to have their hedonistic urges fulfilled without actually achieving any kind of actualization. So ultimately, that's what it means to have a center versus to not have a center, right? So as a person, you need to have a center. Otherwise, you're going to be this corrupted outcast pariah, and you're not going to actually be doing anything for a spiritual purpose, not for a direction towards God. So I guess that was what I mostly got out of this first half. And there's some other stuff in there that got really esoteric, and he talks about, what exactly goes into the shaping of a person beyond just the circumstances of their birth, and he has some astrological things that some people in the server were not particularly happy with, and I think it comes down to this esoteric vision of a purely immaterialist conception of the world, where you're not even going to attribute things to genetics, but rather you're going to attribute them to the alignment of the stars, right? And whether that's literal or allegorical is two different things. I mean, you might have your it's almost like the bell curve meme, right? You have your very low IQ, white female that's like, oh, I believe in astrology and I think that I make all these bad choices because I'm a Pisces or something. Then in the middle you have, the midwits that are like, oh, astrology is fucking stupid. And on the very high end you have the people that are like, they believe in this like allegorical version of astrology that is just in order to purely discount any kind of materialist interpretation of the universe, which is pretty high level stuff. And you can either buy into that or not. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it. I think it's interesting to a degree, and stuff like Evolá's like conception of history and Hyperborea, and this decline of the different ages. Right? Do we literally believe that Nephilim walked the earth at some point? No, I don't think so. But as an allegory for like the fall of man, I think it is a pretty interesting theory. So there was some of that stuff. He has this whole chapter on gnosis that tries to explain what gnosis is, and actually just left me more confused as to what gnosis is. Because I've heard plenty of different things about this. The church basically says Gnosticism is heresy, and you cannot be a Gnostic. So I don't even know what it means to be Gnostic. So I guess it's kind of hard to commit heresy if you don't even know what you're doing. Then, I'll go into some quotes on that, but I would love the feedback of someone like, once again, Satanta or Cassius, if you guys have a feeling about what you think of Gnosis and his opinions on that. And then we had the first chapter on Ontology, where he goes through this distinction of different categories. And now this was extremely esoteric, and altogether, I don't know how much you can give to this, as far as, whether it's the absolute. I mean, this is a kind of metaphysics you could get from just about any philosopher, and there's going to be some familiar takes and some unique takes, and we can go into more about what the different categories are, but essentially it was subjective versus objective, space versus time. And then you get into matter versus energy, figure or form versus. We'll get to it. I have it down somewhere, but yeah, some interesting stuff. And once again, I don't know how perfectly useful that is. Once again, because it is sort of just one interpretation of the universe. Cassius hasn't actually read the book yet. Wow, you are letting me down. It's interesting. Like I said, I think there's a lot of good here, but it is kind of, I don't want to say bogged down, but it's kind of tough to get through with all of this esoteric stuff that is. Once again, I would have to read this probably like 3 or 4 times to get like a really good grasp of what's going on. And I'm not entirely sure if that's something that I want to do or would find that much utility in. But, either way, there's some interesting stuff here, some good stuff. And, I would love to hear what you guys have to say. I'm going to go through some quotes that I thought were pretty interesting. So, in the first chapter right here, he says, "Let us take the example of a man who has 2 heredities and thus 2 equivalent centers, one intellectual and idealistic, and another materialistic and pleasure-driven. As an intellectual, this man will forge a philosophy, but it will be determined by his materialism and his love for pleasure. As a materialist, he will enjoy life as a bon vivant, but his pleasures will be intellectualized. Thus he will enjoy life as an Epicurean and an aesthete, and he will be an elusive and inconsistent man, dominated by the pleasure of the moment, which he will always justify by his hedonistic philosophy. And this is one of the most lethal possibilities there is." I think that was one of the best paragraphs I've read in anything, because I think it really talks about how you have this really toxic combination of intellect directed towards a purely material conception of the world, because you're always going to find ways to rationalize any of your behaviors because you are so intelligent. And I think this is one of the larger things that we are dealing with right now, because you do have a section of the population that's very, very, I don't say very, very, that's this mid-high range IQ, and they're always going to be rationalizing whatever their behaviors are, right? So it comes down to this: they want to do something, therefore they do it, and then they find the rationalization for it afterward because they are high intelligence, not actually analyzing what they believe and what they think is good, and then rationalizing their behavior off of that. They do the opposite. And, plenty of people have this manifest in different ways. And once again, I think when he brings up Nietzsche as a good example, right, you have a philosophy that is also sort of this rationalization for some of his behaviors. And I'm not going to go too much into that because, we've talked about it a lot. But I think that was really, really interesting. And I think you could probably point to most of the issues with, the intelligentsia of the modern day, point that towards this two heredities that he says, this very, very high intellect mixed with this hedonistic material conception of the world. All right. Then in the next chapter, he says, "Be that as it may, what we wish to suggest in most of our considerations on modern genius is that humanistic culture, insofar as it functions as an ideology and therefore as a religion, consists essentially in ignoring three things. Firstly, what God is, because it does not accord primacy to him. Secondly, what man is, because it puts him in the place of God. And thirdly, what the meaning of life is, because this culture limits itself to playing with evanescent things and to plunging into them with criminal unconsciousness. In a word, there is nothing more inhuman than humanism." And once again, totally eviscerating this most popular conception of morality. And I would say this is something we don't talk about nearly enough, but I would say the popular morality of the age is this humanism, which as a true philosophy I don't know so much about, and I'm sure that somebody who actually is into humanism would give a better idea of it. But essentially what it is you're just trying to come up with a secular morality, right? Humanism is just you're going to take some things for granted, not based on any kind of metaphysical truth or any kind of going beyond the material, but just based on how you feel and how you're going to create some level of fairness among people, which is, it's noble in the fact that you have these atheist secular types at least attempting to form some kind of cohesive morality, but it's totally corrupted because you have no starting point, right? Your starting point needs to be something metaphysical, it has to be something immaterial, right? You need to have some essence of the supernatural, some essence of God, or else your morality is always going to fall short, because you need to have something superior to man, or else anything that man does is going to be justifiable under any kind of rationalization. And I like how he says you have humanism, it does not understand what God is, or it ignores what God is and supplants God with man, right? And that's exactly what they're doing. They're not taking any kind of supernatural morality. They're using a purely man-driven, humanity-driven type of morality, which is, like I said, it's going to fall flat. And then the last thing he says, the third thing that they get wrong is they ignore what the meaning of life is, right? And once again, none of these people with this humanistic morality have a meaning of life, right? They might call themselves existentialists or existential nihilists, which really just means there is no meaning to life and we're here for absolutely no reason. And they don't really have an explanation for any of these things, and that's what, once again, they're always going to come up short. So as I'm talking about humanism and how this genius, right, this genius figure is very much in line with the modern day genius, right? This genius is going to be pushing this humanist narrative. Humanism is for atheists who realize that nihilism is a dead end. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like you start off as a nihilist and then you realize that that's like really cringe and you become humanism, but you don't actually have any like basis for that. It's just entirely like because you feel a certain way, like nihilism is too dark for you. It is stupid. And I mean, I think that any kind of humanism, like if you really got into like a nitty gritty debate, I don't know how they would be able to support anything that they believe. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Alright, then I had too many men display intelligence as long as their thought runs in the groove of their desires, or of their desires, interests, and prejudices. But the moment the truth is contrary to what pleases them, their faculty of thought becomes blurred or vanishes, which is at once inhuman and all too human. Man, that was such a good quote too, because once again, you have this corruption of genius, where really all you're going to be doing is rationalizing everything that you already believe. So as soon as you come to something that is contradictory, rather than actually have to confront that, you either rationalize it away, or you ignore it, or you just come up with some way for you to deal with the dissonance of that. Siddhartha says, sounds like it could have come from today. It is, this kind of is today, like today in the sense of, it wasn't written in 2021, but it's kind of close enough, I'd say like 80s is pretty close to modern. Obviously things have gotten a lot worse since then, but anybody who was smart saw the writing on the wall, as you can see. You have people even in the 1700s that have already predicted all of this going down ever since the French Revolution. The modern genius using complex mental gymnastics to hide from their own stupidity. Yeah, and maybe this is a bit on the nose, but with the people with like all this like COVID thing and like the trust the science people, and then the second you have any kind of contradictory science, or you have to use their own logic, it's never working, right? Everything that they say, it's not cohesive. They contradict themselves at every step of the way, but they are intelligent enough that they can do, like you say, you do this mental gymnastics that you can keep surviving in this totally dissonant state of mind. Too many intellects have been wasted on justifying their own vices. Very true. Very true. And once again, I gotta bring it up. My buddy Nisha, always coping. That's what we say. All right. And so the next section, we said, okay, this was a long one. All right. So get ready for this. Imminent divine causality is vertical and supernatural, whereas cosmic causality is horizontal and natural, or in other words, the first is comparable to centrifugal radii, and the second to concentric circles. It is this combination of two relationships or of two perspectives that characterize integrally metaphysical thought, hence gnosis. There is intelligence and intelligence, knowledge and knowledge. I don't really know what he means by that. There is on the one hand a fallible mind that registers and elaborates, and on the other hand a heart intellect that perceives and projects its infallible vision into thought. Here lies the entire difference between a logical certitude that can replace another logical certitude and a quasi-ontological certitude that nothing can replace because it is where we are, because we are what is. Nothing can replace because it is what we are, or because we are what it is. Man, this is like really, really esoteric stuff, and it's really, I kind of just highlighted this to illustrate how hard it was for me to understand this at all. If you can read those two paragraphs back to back and like come away with a very firm understanding of what is being said, then you're much more intelligent than me. But I'm just kind of at a loss, Let's see. Siddhartha says, back on the gnosis thing, people use gnosis in a bunch of different ways, but Schuon means supra-rational knowledge, like religious intuition. Okay, well that's, yeah, that makes sense. I'd say everybody has to be Gnostic in that sense. Knowledge that's kind of outside of classically understood reason. Yeah, I think you do. I totally agree with that. I think to be cohesive and to be consistent, you do need to go beyond reason, because you need to have some kind of a priori, as they say, some starting point, and that point cannot be rooted in reason itself, right? Because then it would be circular, right? It would be self-reflective. You need to have a starting point that is outside of reason in order to justify that reason, or else your starting point could be just about anything, and then you end up just as a humanist, right? You have this totally rationalized morality that doesn't actually make sense because it isn't rooted in anything real. So looking at that, we say it is two relationships, this vertical causality, right? So we say that would be leaning towards this divine, this immaterial, and then horizontal, which is dealing with the natural world. And I guess you have to find some kind of reconciliation between these two things, and that's what he calls gnosis, I guess. So really interesting stuff, and like I said, you'd have to read through this very, very many times to really understand what is being said here, to really get into the nitty-gritty. But the general idea is good. It's very interesting. And so let's see. Next quote, he says, "Furthermore, there seems to be a considerable asymmetry between existence and consciousness, because, as we have just said, the latter is included in the former, while the former, existence, is not necessarily conscious. However, existing things need a witness in order to fully exist. In a certain sense, an unconscious object is nothing without a subject perceiving it, the raw existence of the inanimate object being no more than a sort of virtuality." That's a really interesting quote. I mean, it's sort of a more sophisticated version of "I think, therefore I am," but it's also very, very metaphysical in that he's basically saying if something doesn't have a subjective understanding of itself, then can it be said to exist without the observer to recognize it? Sort of if a tree falls in the forest but no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? Well, in this conception, we would say no. We would say and he even calls it a virtuality, right? He says it's a virtual world because none of these objects have sentience. They don't have a subjective understanding of themselves. So, truthfully, they don't have a mind of their own, so they don't exist unless we are there perceiving them, right? You need to have some kind of subjective observer of the object to give the object any meaning, right? If there's nothing, if there is no observer on anything, then it may as well not exist, right? Essentially is what he's saying. So once again, really, really deep stuff, somewhat esoteric, but that was interesting. And once again, you're getting sort of metaphysics here that is, this is akin to any kind of, Heidegger or someone like that. Like Coke isn't Coke without the social understanding of the brand. There's something in Coke that's outside of the chemical compound in the soda. That's a good point. Yeah, because it is not just... things have more than just they're more than just the sum of their parts, right? You have this this non-physical, this sort of, I don't even know what you would call it, like baggage. You have this this historical baggage that comes with everything, and that is going to actually affect the understanding of that thing, and then quite literally that thing itself. So yeah, I guess everything has a sort of Gnostic aspect, doesn't it? Then, lastly, he had a really interesting quote. This is a short one. He says, "It could also be that every positive thing necessarily resembles God, but that he resembles nothing." So this is sort of talking about forms, right? And he's sort of using this in a Platonic sense, where he says you have a form of something. Everything has a form which has to have some divine archetype that he says. And from this you would extend that everybody, or not everybody, everything is going to have some reflection of God, right? If God is a creator, then everything is going to have a part of God inside of it, is going to be a reflection of God's image. Yet, also, does that mean that if you see God in a tree, right, does that mean that you see a tree in God? And the answer is no, right? So he says that you have this, once again, this is sort of a supra-rational understanding, almost like your mystery of faith, right? How could God be the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, while the Holy Spirit is not the Father, and the Father is not the Son, and the Son is not the Holy Spirit, right? So you have, once again, this is supra-rational, you could say. The fact that everything has a reflection of God, but God has a reflection of nothing, which also, kind of puts this supernatural, this immaterial aspect of something, this transcendent aspect beyond comprehension, right? And it is supra-rationality distilled into a singular being. Well, that was the last quote that I had. I don't know. I think this is kind of a hard one to discuss because it is so esoteric and there's so much to digest here. You can't just have an easy conversation like the last book. But yeah, I'm really curious to hear your guys' thoughts if you have any. If anybody wants to hop into chat, I will be waiting. Let's see. We have Sid says, "Everything has a reflection of God, but God has a reflection of nothing," is a nice quote. Yeah, it was pretty. I mean, that's a very short quote, but I thought it really kind of drove home the point of what he's talking about when it comes to different forms. And that was probably the highlight of the categorical chapter. I mean, that chapter was, man, that was really kind of bogged down in kind of technicality. I don't know, how much I really felt about that. But interesting stuff. It was cool. I mean, it's an interesting metaphysics, and he's got some good thoughts here. But I'd say, talking about the genius is where it really shines. And I don't know. We'll see how we feel about this going forward to next week, and how we feel about the rest of it. But yeah, I guess it seems like everybody has said what they want to say. So I'll give one last chance for anybody to hop in or comment, and then I can wrap it up. And then, so finally, just plug myself. If you're not following on Trovo, follow. And if you are not following on YouTube, follow on YouTube. Like, subscribe, follow everything. You know the drill. I show some respect here. All right, we're putting out content. Just smash that subscribe button. All right. Well, thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for showing up, and I hope we can talk again next week.